This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. Now, we've all seen a period of unprecedented layoffs recently, and I think in most cases, the highest number that we've seen in any of our careers. And whilst unemployment stats seem pretty low, the sort of unemployment the politicians were talking about over elections, both in the US and the UK, there's definitely a feeling that they're masking a really challenging period, particularly for those in the tech and professional services industries and other sort of well-paying white collar jobs. And I don't know about you guys, but my LinkedIn is littered with pretty heartbreaking stories of talented people in recruitment professionals who are out of work, who have been really struggling with the candidate experience, ghosted by employers, and just really having a horrendous time of it all. And I really wanted to get into that, and that's why I'm particularly excited about today's guest. Nick Bilotta is the learning experience manager at Discord, but before he found this role, he was out of work for 8 or 9 months. Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show and for agreeing to share your learnings from what I reckon was a pretty difficult time. I think it's really brave.
Well, I don't know about brave, but I certainly hope it's helpful. This is, since I started this career, the third sort of job search period that I've had. This was the longest by almost double. And I took the same sort of or a similar kind of aggressive approach each time. And I also get to this place each time and go, wow, what an incredible learning experience. I probably grew in my career more during that job search than I actually do doing my work. And yet every second of that job search does not feel like that. It feels like awful. It feels like a nightmare. It feels frustrating. It feels all those things. And even knowing that you're going to end up with all these learnings and you're going to grow as a result of it really doesn't help that much. So if there's anything I can do to help people sort of reframe and push through that, and feel like they have more agency and ownership really over a process that often feels the opposite, that's good. And I'm always happy to take that opportunity. So thank you for asking me, Felix.
Absolutely. So you've been through this sort of process. Sounds like an awful word, but you've been through.
It is a process. We're all processing.
Been through the process 3 times. Has this time felt any different to the previous 2?
I will say, how is it different? Well, one, active reach out was almost nothing, which I wasn't used to. I was getting very, very little percentage wise. I track everything in a spreadsheet. It's part of what I call hope management, which is a major part of my approach to job search. You need to have something out there. You need to have a fishing line that's dancing a little bit, even if it's far away in the future. And so I take a very, what marketers or salespeople would call a high top of funnel approach. So I'm reaching out a lot myself, but I'm also tracking incoming reach out. So there was very little and almost none of that. I think also there was more jobs, sort of counterintuitively, than I was used to. There just also seemed to be hundreds of thousands of applicants for each one. Obviously, I can't codify that from my side. Just even hearing from friends of mine that were recruiters, and I think possibly a result of all of that, the other sort of biggest piece that I noticed was there, especially in the startup and tech space, there was far less projection from hiring managers and recruiters about what your background could produce in this role. And by that, I mean, I think in the past, especially in startups, oftentimes, you may be applying for a role that you've never done exactly before, but you've done something close and you have all these indicators and you actually have recruiters reaching out to you, even if you're like, oh, I've never done a director before, or I've never, had this particular scope. They're doing a lot of projection. This time it felt very much like that wasn't on the table, and instead they wanted exactly the background. You have worked with companies at this size, at this stage, in this industry. Even though I work in HR and learning and development, that is markedly similar, if not the same, sort of regardless of business model, in a lot of ways. The main sort of tenets agree and are the same, but it was not treated like that, and that was very different for me too. And I really had to think differently about how I sort of pitched and approached it, given that.
Yeah, that one really resonates. As you know, my line of sort of main line of work is sort of recruitment outsourcing for small mid-sized companies, a lot of scale ups, and because hiring managers are very much in the sort of it's a buyer's market, it's an employer's market right now. Then it's really hard. It's really hard, and I mean, luckily we've got some great clients that do this. But that conversation around you got to think outside of the box, think about people from other industries, think about whether you can promote into this role, that sort of thing. There's no external reason why they need to do that. So I think you have as a recruiter, you have to work much harder to get that sort of intrinsic motivator to do that. And I can certainly imagine that in companies where that's not part of the culture, just hiring like for like is the logical thing to do. So I that really resonates.
I just to talk numbers. I was engaged. I at minimum applied to or talked to companies about 600 roles in that eight to 9 month span. 23 of which led to actual interviews, and 4 of which went to final stages. The feedback I got all 3 times when I didn't get a final offer was someone just had more aligned experience every single time. And so that was with like really passing through a whole process. We're talking multiple layers of interviews. We're talking some of the most ridiculous at-home exercises I've ever been given in my life. There was a startup, I won't name names, that the prompt was functionally like, we've never hired a people person, like build our entire people strategy. That was the prompt for an at-home, of which I made the choice I make with all of these, which is first and foremost, this has to be a learning experience for me. My job right now is looking for jobs, and so getting the most out of that is the value to me. I've never written a people strategy from scratch for an early stage startup. It could be fun to do that. Let me see what that's like, but that is inarguably a ridiculous ask. It is just like an unpaid labor, of which they didn't go with me, and so a fair bit that they used absolutely none of it, but certainly could have. And so I think the pendulum swings between labor and management, right? And this was felt like a pretty big swing from the previous job search I had been in, which was 2021, the sort of rehiring boom that happened once we figured out, and it almost felt in the marketing. You work more closely with this stuff, but it felt almost personal. Like there was this like angry sort of renouncement of this sort of pro labor moment that we had in that 2021 to 2022, and it's like, well, now we're going to fix it. And I think I'm sure that was sort of part of the feelings that you get when you're on a job search. It's not say something that's true. Certainly management across businesses does not work in an organized manner in that capacity. But I do think a lot of the layoffs that we experienced were in part at least a result of mass hiring booms in times when there was a lot of labor competition in value on the labor side. And so all of those things are connected. You know what I mean? That sort of pendulum swing feels very connected.
Nick, it's really interesting, and I'm going to paraphrase because I think you're absolutely right. So there was that big, completely out of control peak in hiring in 2021, and pretty much global. And I remember reading Zuckerberg's post when they made the layoffs, the first round of Meta layoffs. And what amazed me was, and I saw this in a lot of the sort of verbiage that we were hearing from big tech in particular, saying it was something along the lines of, we have inefficiencies in the organization. We've become bloated, and we have employees that aren't pulling their weight. Some combination of that. No sort of actually, you know what, in retrospect, we were expecting a boom to business that didn't come. Our organizational strategy wasn't, was too aggressive, and sadly now individuals are going to have to pay the price of it. It shifted a lot of the language, just shifted so much of that blame onto the individuals. And so in a weird way, I'm not surprised it felt personal, Nick, because it's either Labour's fault, it's either individual employees' fault, or it's the fault in the boardroom. And I know I know where that's gonna, and that sort of feeling trickles through. But let's just bring it back, because it's probably a number that you've heard quite a lot. But 600 applications in 9 months is intense. So I've got a couple of questions, which you're not supposed to do as a podcast interviewer. But hey, I'm living my life, Nick. I'm just going to do whatever I want.
No, you can't tell us what to do. The podcast
Yeah.
police, they can't catch us. Don't worry about it.
Take this, Spotify.
That's right.
So the first question is, like, how on earth did you apply to that many roles? And then the second one is, do you think that you were a good fit for all of those 600, or at least a good enough fit to actually apply for those roles, or was it sort of a click and go kind of vibe?
Yeah. So I'll answer the second first. Probably not all of them. However, it was part of an intentional strategy, which is my sort of longer answer to the first one. So again, this is very personal to me, though it has resonated with other people. I started thinking about this concept of hope management, which is if I become hopeless, I can't put in the work that it's going to take for me to be able to get a job, because it's multifaceted, right? Like, applications are actually probably not the most efficient use of your time overall. Networking, talking to recruiters, talking to people with jobs, asking for recommendations, things like that. That is actually the thing that probably moves the needle more. Now, depending on where you are in your career, you have more or less access to a network like that. And so that can be really tough to hear, but it's true, especially at least in the sort of micro world of New York tech and startups that I live in. The hope management piece is simply that thing I described earlier, which is I gotta have plate spinning, because to deal with the rejection, I have to be able to look forward to something. I also think it's a complete waste of time to one button apply to jobs that it doesn't cost me anything, but it's not really doing that thing for me. And so I had just come off working in a role where I was starting with ChatGPT 3.5, I was using ChatGPT pretty heavily for content synthesis and building workflows for a content development team that I was leading at my previous company. So I was very familiar with the technology, and I was using it more and more. And so I just sort of immediately turned it to this purpose. And so the answer is, in part, I started learning more about what LLMs like ChatGPT can do and utilizing it to build workflows that work for me. This also was a time when GPTs, which is like the customizable interface you can create for ChatGPT, where you can layer over your own, it's called RAG, but you can layer over your own guidance on top of any request, so that you can sort of repeatedly ask, and it can learn things. And so I built things like a very detailed, what I called my professional summary, that was pages and pages on a PDF of quite a bit of detail of who I was. So instead of doing what you may do sort of normally, is if you went to ChatGPT and said, help me write a cover letter, I was going to ChatGPT and saying, all of this about me. Now here's the job description. Run an analysis. How strong of a fit am I for this role? And what can you presume a recruiter cares most about based on this job description, because we all know that like you can sort of see that, okay, it's leadership development, got it, right? And so I built these sort of tools to then help me like very quickly automate a process of developing a strategy for applying for different jobs. That can't change the fact that like, I'm getting weeded out by AI filters on the other end, or an entry level contract sourcer who's going, he has 10 years and I need 11. Bye, right?
Or
Like,
or
like
or just as likely, he's got 10 years and I need 8. It's
right,
like,
right. So and so I can't sort of solve for any of those things, but I started to think of it as an arms race,
mm,
right? If automation and stuff are being used on the recruiting side, especially in the sort of the sorting and sifting, that initial stage that is application review, then how best can I sort of use it on my side as well? Knowing that frankly my strength is interviewing.
mm,
So like the game is actually getting there. Whatever gets me there is the thing that is sort of most valuable without lying, obviously, because that's going to come back to bite me at a high level. So I started building tools and workflows like that. It's still a lot of work. It doesn't
mm.
really change the clicks. It changes how much like independent thought that you have to put into that initial application process while still making it targeted and accurate, and allowed me to act quickly.
It probably makes it less exhausting as well, I would imagine, in some ways. At least you're not having to retype out a new cover letter each time and using your grey matter on it.
Yeah, and emotionally, certainly. And it also allowed me to move quickly, because that was something I was noticing too. Jobs were up and they'd be taken down in a day because they're getting 500 applicants. And so, partially it became a necessity in some ways to be able to move quickly on a lot of these things while also like being the primary childcare for my 3-year-old daughter, and all of these other things that I was trying to do. It allowed me to do that, and I really built on that over time. So I think that was a big part of sort of the volume piece, is roles, to your second question, that maybe I'm good for. I'd be interested in doing that job, and wouldn't it be an interesting exercise to work with the robot I built and say, well, what's a pitch look like? What does a pitch look like for me in this job that I haven't done technically? Oh, that's cool. That is interesting. I would like that. And actually what I found in that process is I started updating that professional summary with more and more detail of things I'd be interested in, ways my experience may apply, because that process of applying to different jobs and honing in that pitch for each job unearthed ideas to me that I hadn't thought of before, of like, oh, maybe I want to be a chief staff, right? Or for this kind of role, for chief learning officer or something. Yeah, all these kind of things that aren't maybe strictly it matches the exact title that I've had in the past. And so it became part of the learning and the fun of it, which was sort of one of the like 3 big pillars of my approach, was that massive sort of top of funnel application.
So that's fascinating. So before we move on from this volume top of funnel piece, because I'm keen to get into the network side of things, which I think is so powerful. What conclusions would you draw from an employer's perspective, from the experience that you have? If you were to go to, and maybe you have, if you were to go to your company's people function or your TA function, what could they learn from your experience?
I think we can all be more honest about what application review is. And I think that I think the whole thing could be streamlined if we just said, these are the 4 things we care about. Please answer us, extemporaneously about your experience on these 4 things. And if you check those boxes, we'll move you forward. I actually think it's an interesting use case. I did some work with a startup that was using it for that purpose. It just basically asks follow-up questions to what would be a normal application process. And when you're a recruiter that's doing a lot of those sort of initial, like, you're listening to the person, because I've done this before, but what you really do is going, yep, yeah, okay, move them on, right? Because your job is to make sure that they don't get in front of the hiring manager unless they meet certain qualifications. I think we can make that all a lot smoother and stop a lot of the frivolity and sort of nonsense around it that we sort of put to make it feel like it's this much more human experience when it's a filtering and box checking, and it's just sort of a nature of the first part. And then the fundamental other piece that I don't know that there is a solve for, and I tell people who sort of ask for my perspective on this all the time, is hiring is fundamentally flawed. It's really, really hard. The best people are good at it because they have or have developed intuition, that there really, really seems to like give them insight to it. We don't want that to be true. We want there to be objective systems. We want there to be a process. But I think a lot about a conversation I had with a recruiter been in who'd been in machine learning since before they started calling it AI, right? And so had been around this work for a very long time. And I was asking him about LinkedIn recruiter, which a lot of recruiters will complain about. I don't know if you would say that, but
I'm actually a big fan. But
okay, great. I said, why don't they have the perfect AI system, right? They have access to ChatGPT. They have more data than anyone else does. No one on earth knows who's looking for jobs, at least in the American market, and who wants to hire people more than them. Like, why can't those be connected together? And he said it's simple because humans are the problem. Humans don't really know what they're looking for, and humans don't really know how to pitch themselves, and that is unsolvable by a computer. And so I wish I had a better answer, but I wonder if it's like it's just hard because it's hard because it's human beings trying to figure out what they need and who they are. I mean, you give me your perspective as a recruiter. I mean, you live in this stuff.
so my perspective slightly along the same lines, but slightly maybe less bleak.
I don't know that mine's bleak. I just think it's yeah, you give up. Yeah, it's stoic, right? You control what you can control. Yeah.
Yes, stoic. So look, I think there are a few things. So first of all, actually, until very recently, so I think that we can make a lot of recruitment processes, almost all recruitment processes, significantly more predictive of how someone's going to do in the role than they are today. Because at the moment, you're right, you've got a bunch of hiring managers, and a lot of them, some of them are good, most of them are not very good, and some of them are catastrophically bad. Um, and you've got a lot of guts. You got almost no training in most organizations. You're almost no structure, almost no objectivity. So we as talent acquisition professionals and HR and people professionals, we all know quite a lot of the sort of foundational steps we can get to get from a 2 out of 10 to a 7.5 out of 10. Now, I think it's hard to get above that,
It's a significant difference. It's a significant difference.
which is a significant difference. And it's hard to get above that in the interview process because there is a big one of a few big lies at the center of recruitment, which is that we are just looking to hire the person who's going to do the best job for our organization. And the truth is, we're not. We're also hiring for someone that's going to be a confidant and a friend and on the like a team player and all the rest of it, because we're going to have to sit next to them for the next like 5 years or 2 years or whatever it is. And I think that's a valuable part of the recruitment process that's just missed out. And by the way, I think we should be honest about the fact that we're doing that. I'm not a believer. I'm not a believer that we should just hire for fit for the role, because culture is such a big part of an organization. People going into work and being happy every day is a huge part of an organization. So that's where I come from on that one. Holy moly! I've just seen the time, Nick. We got a lot to get through. So I'm gonna stop talking. But let me just ask you this question. There's a sort of, it's one of these awful sort of generally accepted wisdom stats that I bet no one's ever actually looked into. But there's sort of generally accepted wisdom that somewhere between 70 and 80% of jobs are never actually posted on job boards because they're filled through network or they're filled through exec search and sort of never make it through. My instinct is that's probably been correct over the last 9 months. Lots of redundancies, senior people move in, they bring their team with them, etc., etc., etc. You mentioned fleetingly earlier in the episode that you spent a lot of time speaking to your friends, speaking to people in roles, speaking to hiring managers, speaking to recruiters. I guess as a job seeker, how much how did that experience feel different from the high volume experience?
Well, I think one thing that's really important for me to be honest about is my privilege in this. Like I'm a what the kids call a yapper. I like to talk. I like to have conversations like this. And so for some people, the networking side, the conversations, the reach out, it is extremely painful and extremely difficult. I benefit from the fact that I actually enjoy it. That doesn't mean it's not frustrating, that it is in nowhere near as discreet of a relationship between your effort and potential for a job as like thoroughly and well applying to a job, right? That feels like this is what it should be like, right? And there's a little bit of like sort of discomfort and misalignment and that piece. But again, I personally enjoy that, and I think that I definitely got to a place where I was approaching it much more as the positive experience of just checking back in with people that I knew and liked and had good experiences before. And it's also in some ways, which I needed, and I think a lot of people need in job search, a validation of your professional experience too, because all these smart, talented people with jobs and are working like you enough to want to grab coffee with you, enjoyed working with you enough for it to be presumed that they would recommend you if given the opportunity. And so it was positive to me in that capacity too. And even people that I've coached and worked with who are not extroverted, who don't sort of love this environment, they would say the same thing too. There's something incredibly validating, even if you have to push yourself outside of your comfort zone a little bit and reconnecting and grabbing digital coffee or real coffee with somebody and just talking to them about their work and your experience and going like, oh yeah, great. This person's going to bring up 6 things that I did for them in our last job that I didn't even think about that I feel really good about. So that part was good for me. I have actual numbers somewhere in the massive spreadsheet of 600 of like which led to interviews. I'd say it'd probably 50-50. If maybe more like 60-40. So like 40% of those 23 interviews were cold reach out. Maybe 60% had some, even if it's sort of far tangential connection, but some sort of lift up. The specific circumstance you were talking about at the beginning, I actually didn't run into a lot of jobs that were never posted kind of things. I don't know. 2% of that 600 were from networking that there wasn't also a job post for. So I can't speak to that dynamic. I'm also not an executive, right? I'm interviewing at the senior manager to director level. So maybe that happens more higher up. And it certainly happens at earlier and earlier stage startups. So
That's workforce total.
oh, then yeah, maybe.
But it's interesting because sitting where I'm sitting, I think one of the things that people don't realize is there's a huge number of companies that the majority of their recruitment is they hire someone very senior who they've known for ages.
Who has a network?
Yeah, probably no, well, probably immediately from the company that they've left, and then they'll pull their whole team, or they'll pull all of their management, and they'll bring a bunch of people that know excellent, terrible for diversity, terrible for creating a new kind of culture, but that is a reality of how small particularly how some small challenger businesses get started. Just while I think thinking of this as a bit of an advice, sort of cathartic episode. So I'm a big fan. I'm also a yapper, but as you can imagine, being a podcast host. But I think one of the things that has served me really well in my life, and I think in a lot of ways, sales is similar to the process of looking for a job, and that you have to run a pipeline, you have to do all the rest of it. I have got into the habit of, if I'm ever grabbing a coffee with someone, I'll always go in with a couple of things, a couple of asks for them. off the back of it? Can you introduce me to this person, or do you think that do you think there's a role in your organization that this would be as a job seeker? But I think one of the things that people do really badly is that they'll even yappy folks like yourself, Nick, is that you get the coffee, you'll have the coffee, you have the catch up, you'll end it with hey, really great to see you, man. Um, hey, let me know if something comes up, or let me know, like, it'd be great if you could help me. It's sort of left with a sort of an ethereal cloud of let me know if there's any opportunities that you come across. And as someone who gets asked for advice coffees quite regularly, it's so much easier when someone comes with a specific ask, because then all like I know, right? Oh, actually, you know what? Someone asked me for an introduction to you. I'd say, well, actually, I can do that. I had a great chat with Nick. I know he's the kind of guy that's always open to new conversations. I'll put you in touch. If someone asks for a coffee with someone that I'm just connected to on LinkedIn and I actually don't know who they are, I'll just tell them that. Or if someone asks me something I'm uncomfortable with, I'm say, hey, I'm really sorry, it's not the right time. But the hardest thing is if someone's actually expecting you to put in the brain work yourself. Hey, do you know any companies that are hiring? Do you know any sort of places that might be good to put me in touch with? I think that's really unfair, because it's making me sit down for half an hour and troll through my LinkedIn network. And my experience is that people love to help. People get a kick out of it. They get a little dopamine hit. So that's advice number one. And then advice number two is to always follow up on how it's gone afterwards. Yeah, I had a great coffee with Nick. He actually ended up coming on my podcast. Fantastic. I love it. So any listeners out there who are in the job search, that's the Felix
Podcast.
Mitchell.
Yeah.
Yeah, Felix Mitchell advice.
Start a
There.
podcast. Yeah.
Start a podcast, job done, easy peasy. Everyone's doing it these days.
I will say, I will say my version of that. Couple, couple of things. I think that's great advice. The way in which I am most active in sort of securing their engagement and then doing something with it was actually often through this, massive top of funnel approach, right? I would go to their LinkedIn and see who they're connected with and ask, I mean, I'm on, 2 to 3 of these like role posting websites at a time. I know all the jobs that are available right now. And so I see like, ooh, to use a name Figma, or, oh, they work here, or they work there. Oh, this person knows someone like that. They told me that they'd be thrilled to be able to connect. You know what I mean? Like, so I am sometimes even active post that conversation. I think for me, those conversations are more sort of casual around in the way that you're talking about, but then that person's in my head and I'm actively sort of searching through their network, which they often suggest, right? And then I think the other thing that has been incredibly valuable to me in my life is a piece of advice I got early on in my career in tech, which is you absolutely never know who's going to give you your next job. The person who is the there for 3 months intern, if you're on the onboarding team, which I was at Squarespace, right, can get you a job 10 years later. And so I never say no to anyone who asks for advice, help, recommendations. Hey, can we jump on a call? Can we talk? Hey, can we go get coffee? When I'm super busy, like I am now with the job, and I got all these things coming up, I can always spare. I might have to move that 30-minute meeting 6 times, unfortunately, but I am incredibly intentional about putting positivity, support, and just an openness to help out into the world. And I have absolutely seen that. Call it karma, call it just like the reality of how networks work. But I sign up for stuff, I do stuff, I back up my word, I help people out. And it may not come back directly from that person, but that experience has always come back to me. And I often found, getting back to this sort of central idea of hope management, even when I'm the one in need, it's super helpful for me to go help somebody else for a little bit and get out of this headspace of like everything's going wrong. And so I even loved those opportunities to like, just chat through someone who's also dealing with a difficult time. And so then that person is in your head. You can be tactical later when you get back to the computer and you're looking through their LinkedIn, or you see um, you see a connection to this company that's 1 degree off or something. Then if you recently chatted with that person, you can go in and say like, hey, I saw, do you know this person well? Could you give me a connection? I definitely had to force myself, as you're saying, to be very tactical and be active, because you can't expect people to just like be sitting around in their regular life or, what job would Nick be good for? Right. That's my focus. That's not theirs. So I agree on the tactical side. I would just often do it even after the conversation was, and so we've like reconnected. It was genuine. It wasn't, clawing in any way, which was more a function of my lack of comfort than they would be uncomfortable with me being specific about ass, as you described. But just to have that connection with people and then go back through and say, hey, looks like you know somebody who works here. Can you put me in touch, etc. And having a bunch of really sometimes effing awkward conversations at the beginning. And then you just talk about absolutely anything other than job search and their work. And it immediately melts and becomes better. And you ask questions about them and you show genuine interest. And suddenly it's a good conversation. And I have not yet encountered anyone in hundreds of these conversations that don't come out of it extremely willing, if not eager, to be able to support you in your job search, given that point that you actually just mentioned, right? In job searches, we should be more honest about. People want to work with people they want to sit next to, right? And I think if you think about these sort of networking interactions as a way to showcase that skill, you're not going to show them what a great software engineer that you are. You're not going to show them what a great people operations associate you are, but you can show them you're the kind of person that people would want to work with. And fundamentally, that's who people want to recommend, because it's very unlikely, that they're going to be expert in your skill, but that piece that you talked about and we're so right about highlighting, that you can showcase in this environment.
And what I love as well is like I think getting into the habits really helpful. I don't like I never feel awkward about catching up with someone for ages, largely because first of all I just love catching up with people. I get genuine kick out of it, and there may be an ask for it, but I also wouldn't mind if they asked me for help on something. So that's kind of I've built that muscle up. But there's a guy called Adam Connors who is as far as I can tell, the best networker I've ever met in my life. Um, and I was speaking with him, and he gave me a piece of advice that I'll always remember, which is every month he scrolls to the bottom of his WhatsApps or his SMS. He finds someone that he hasn't messaged for like years, just pops him a note saying, "Hey, look, I hope you're well. Let's jump on a call or grab a coffee or something like that," with no agenda whatsoever. And he was like, I've met best friends that way. I've reconnected with someone that I've then set up a blind date with someone else. I've got business that way. I'm just like, I love that, and I just think it's one of the fun things about work for me is being able to work with your friends and help your friends and kind of all succeed together. I know that we're both talking from a position of immense privilege in this one, but I think that anyone that's worked in the professional world um, will have someone that's willing to stick their neck out for them. It's just a question of giving them the opportunity to do so.
One other just sort of quick tactical piece around that. I don't scroll to the end of my SMS still. Maybe I should, but if a thought comes into your brain, a memory of working with a person and something funny happening or something interesting happened, text that person, message them. There are few things as compelling to somebody was thinking about me in a positive manner or wanted to think about, like, remember that crazy thing, maybe that crazy thing that happened at work, right? Like, and it could be a two text conversation. It could be like a, thumbs up reaction to it. But oftentimes people say, like, how are you? Right. Like, and just to that point of like a genuine way to like, these are people who are top of mind for you. You have some sort of positive memory of them. You have more network than you realize. And I think there are a lot of different ways to think about how to energize that, both when you're looking for a job search and in between.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on. It's been awesome. I'm feeling that hopefully there are some people out there listening who will get some real value from this. You did a post on your own LinkedIn that I thought really neatly summed up your experience and was quite uplifting. So we'll have a little link to that in the episode notes. But thank you for joining us. It was really great, and hope you have a really great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Felix. It was a joy. Thanks for linking to that. Please, anybody that connects and to that and has questions, as I was just saying, could not be more open to conversations and discussion. And so connect with me and let me know how I can help. Appreciate it.